Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize myself for my second 5 minutes of questions. When the original CISA 2015 law was negotiated, significant privacy concerns were raised. As far as I'm aware, these concerns did not come to fruition. Ms. Rinaldo, you were there. Would you please walk us through the initial debates and how they were resolved dealing with privacy?
Yeah, absolutely. So during the 4 years, we had 3 different bills that were introduced. And from the first bill, which was a couple of pages, to the one that was signed into law, which was much, much bigger, we took a lot of the feedback from privacy industry, privacy groups and industry. John was instrumental in a lot of this work that we did. And we made changes. The information has to be anonymized. We want to make sure that what is actually being shared is the zeros and ones of it. And I know that the Inspector General has done a report recently and has determined that no privacy issues have arisen in the past 10 years. So the language and all the protections that we put in have been working.
That's great, because I'll tell you, other than the name, privacy concerns might be the biggest obstacle to getting this reauthorized. So the fact that you haven't, that report has 0 reports of privacy breaches is great. Mr. Miller, you were also instrumental, as we all just heard Mr. Ronaldo say. Have you heard of any privacy-related concerns over the last 10 years the law's been in effect?
No, and I think that's a pretty compelling evidence that the bill itself and the structure and the protections that were put in place to protect privacy and civil liberties worked. If I could add one other protection that I think was very important to what Diane said, actually having DHS serve as the central hub, what we kind of called a civilian interface at the time, was very important. If you think about what else was going on during this time, there was a lot of suspicion about sharing, and in particular about surveillance agencies in light of the Snowden disclosures, for instance. And so I think that the protections that Diane mentioned, requiring the stripping out of PII was very important, but also sharing through DHS and then having DHS share across the federal government was a good innovation, I think, of the time as well.
Mr. Shemek, anything to add there regarding privacy?
Just the only thing I would add to it is, number one is I made my statement, we have not had anything realized in regards to any disclosures. Also, from a financial services industry standpoint, we take privacy extremely seriously. It's something that's core to how our business operates. So having those protections in there and really the focus on it in the act and the bill is really important.
Ms. Keene?
I would agree. I think they've summed it up. There really has not been any, to my knowledge, concerns from a privacy perspective, and I think that's one of the reasons that a clean authorization of it, from a renewal standpoint, is just critical. We can change what we need to change later, but what's working right now from a fundamental perspective is working.
And that was my follow-up question, and you said clean reauth, which means you would all agree that there was no need to change the language when it comes to privacy, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
They all said yes for the record. Thank you very much for that. I do want to get to one more because we're talking about information sharing with the government, private to government, but can you all talk about some reflections on how this legislation changed information sharing amongst private to private entities and how it fostered that information sharing? Feel free to jump in, whoever wants to.
I'll jump in. Talking to, for instance, the executive director of the ITISAC recently, it does seem like, and talking about some of the types of things that CISA 15 really has allowed the private sector to do. I think there are criticisms of whether the private government sharing can be better. We've heard some of those already today. But the private to private sharing is really a critical and maybe sometimes overlooked aspect of what CISA 15 really enabled. Again, if you look at the ISACs, again, some of the ISACs have less than 100 people. Some of them have thousands of companies involved. You look at the National Council of ISACs, the state and local, tribal and territorial ISAC. All of these ISACs allow, it's kind of a concept of the few protecting the many, and they're very important in particular for those small and medium-sized businesses who can perhaps participate through ISACs because they don't have $1 million budgets to spend on cybersecurity. So I think there's really been a pretty dramatic increase in private-to-private sharing that has been enabled because of CISA 15.
Wonderful. All right, well, I'm now out of time.